The battlefield. The air thick with the scent of iron, smoke, and sweat. Thousands of men locked in desperate struggle, steel against flesh, shields cracking, the dull thud of spears piercing through armor. And amidst the chaos, silence. The kind that lingers after a scream dies too early. The Romans called it Gloria Romana, Roman glory. But for the men who stood in that muddy field, ankle deep in blood, there was no glory. Only survival. As the clash faded, the victors didn't raise their swords in triumph. They looked around at the carnage, friends motionless, enemies still twitching, the air vibrating with flies. In that moment, Rome's greatest weapon was not courage, it was endurance. The ability to keep standing when everything inside begged to collapse. And when the dust finally settled, there were those who did not die. But perhaps wished they had. For every Roman general who returned to the city with golden laurels, there were hundreds of nameless soldiers carried off the field, broken in body and shattered in mind. Some had limbs crushed by the heavy Celtic axes. Some had ribs punctured by spears. Some bled out slowly in the dirt, calling out names that no one would ever remember. Aulus Cornelius Celsus, the Roman physician, once wrote that war revealed the true limits of human endurance. He described wounds so terrible they seemed beyond nature, bones shattered into dust, entrails exposed, teeth torn out by blunt blows. And yet, many of these men still breathed. Still clung to life, because death, somehow, felt slower than pain. The Roman Medici, the military doctors, would drag the wounded away. Not with gentleness, but with necessity. They worked quickly, mechanically, stripping armor, cutting cloth, pouring wine over open wounds to burn out infection. The smell of vinegar, blood, and fear mixed together like incense in a temple of suffering. And while their comrades cheered for victory, these men entered another war. One fought not against barbarians, but against infection, fever, and memory. The battlefield grew quiet again. But in the hearts of the survivors, the screams never stopped. The Romans had a word for their military hospitals, valetudinarium. A place not of comfort, but of endurance. Each permanent camp had one. Divided into wards, wounds, fevers, amputations, and the dying. Inside, the air was heavy with smoke from oil lamps. The moans of men echoing through wooden halls, and the clinking of bronze instruments laid out on tables. There were no miracles here. Only skill, and iron, and fire. Cauterization was common. A red-hot bar pressed against flesh to stop bleeding. The sound of burning skin was a sound every medic knew well. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes, the scream just faded into silence. When the rot began, when a wound turned black and the stench filled the room, there was only one choice left: amputation. Bronze saws. Iron hooks. No anesthesia, except for strong wine or a mouthful of leather to bite. Assistants held the man down, and if he lived through it, he was considered fortunate. It was not cruelty. It was survival. Rome's own brand of compassion. The Medici were not healers in the modern sense. They didn't promise life, only the chance to keep serving a little longer. And yet, among the legions, they were both respected and feared. For their hands decided who would live, who would lose a limb, and who would die before sunrise. Still, amid the screams and blood, there were small acts of humanity. A medic pressing a hand on a soldier's shoulder. A cup of wine offered with trembling fingers. A quiet, fortis esto, be strong. Even here, in this chamber of pain, there was still something Roman. Discipline, duty, and the faintest echo of hope. Not all wounds could be seen. Some men returned from war with all their limbs intact. But something inside them had shattered. They called it night madness, or fear of shadows. Today, we would call it trauma. The sleepless nights. The trembling hands. The sudden bursts of anger. The fear of crowds, the hatred of silence. They had survived. But they were no longer the same. Roman society didn't understand this kind of pain. To feel too much was weakness. To suffer silently was duty. Men were told to endure, to bury their nightmares under discipline and drink. Historians like Tacitus wrote of veterans who avoided celebrations, who shunned gatherings, who refused to speak of their campaigns. They were ghosts walking among the living, haunted by sounds only they could hear. Some rejoined the army, not out of pride, but because it was the only place where their pain made sense. Others wandered the countryside, begging, drinking, or simply vanishing. Rome celebrated its victories with parades and monuments. But for the wounded of mind, there were no arches, no songs, no statues. Only the endless echo of what they'd seen, and the knowledge that no one wanted to hear their stories. When a Roman soldier completed 25 years of service, he received his missio honesta, an honorable discharge, a pension, a plot of land. But most never made it that far. Those crippled or too weak to fight were released early, under missio caseria, a medical discharge. It sounded honorable, but in reality, it meant nothing. No land, no money, no recognition. They returned home disfigured, missing arms, eyes, or hope, only to find that Rome had no place for them. Some were lucky, given minor duties in camps, teaching recruits or keeping watch at night. But most were discarded like broken tools. In cities like Rome and Carthage, they begged in the shadow of marble temples. Men who once held the front lines of empire, now holding out empty bowls. The empire that glorified its heroes, forgot the hands that built it. In time, emperors tried to fix it. Augustus created the aerarium militare, a military treasury to fund pensions. For a while, it worked. But greed and neglect turned it hollow. As decades passed, the same men who had marched across 3 continents died waiting for pensions that never came. A few found solace, opening taverns, working as guards, teaching the art of war to new generations. But many turned to darker paths. Mercenaries, bandits, or even gladiators. Fighting once more. This time for survival, not for Rome. In the end, the empire stood tall, its monuments still rising under the sun. But its soldiers faded into dust, their stories lost in the cracks of marble. Rome built triumphal arches for victory, but none for pain. It crowned its generals with gold, but left its wounded to die in silence. And yet, in that silence, the real Rome still speaks. Not through emperors or senators, but through the men who fought, bled, and endured. And through every scar that whispered, "I was there."